Hello, everyone, and welcome to a very special Spacepower podcast. I'm your host, Bill Woolf, the president and founder of the Space Force Association, and I'm honored today to have with us Representative Bacon out of Nebraska and Representative Carbajal out of California. Gentlemen, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
And what I really want to talk about is the Legacy Guardian Act that you were able to get voted on and approved to make law, which this law, what this does, it allows Air Force veterans like myself who grew up in space operations to be recognized as a Legacy Guardian, which means a tremendous amount to, I know, thousands of people out there that spent their entire careers working in the space operations career field and now to be able to be recognized. But first, before we get into the specific act itself, let's talk about how it evolved. Representative Bacon, I know you've got probably one of the most passionate folks on staff that is supporting the Space Force.
Who is that?
You know,
I'm just teasing.
We'll just say his name's Mark Riley.
Yes.
And just tell me a little bit about how this evolved, how this act evolved.
Well, first of all, I want to thank Salute for being a good partner in this effort. Along with many other, we worked together on so many different efforts. We traveled the world together, and and we're both veterans. That's how I got to first meet him. And I like one or two Marines, so I thought, make him number 3.
I was in the adult service, the Marine Corps.
But so we've been a good team, and really this would start our chief of staff. He's a career Air Force space officer, wasn't in the Space Force. And I was there, I was an advocate for the space service early on, we can come back to that. But he says, there's all these people who served a career in the Air Force and space, but now we got this new service. How do they feel like they're part of the team? Mm-hmm. So himself and a few other of our veterans put this Legacy Guardian concept together. And I'll be candid, it wasn't something I came up on my own, and I had to have him explain it to me a couple times. But that was the nexus of it, was our team, who works with space people all over the country, recommended it.
Perfect.
Put it together.
No, thank you, sir. I appreciate that. And Representative Carbajal, from your perspective, obviously you support Vandenberg, Space Force Base, and the district out there. So how important is this to you?
Well, there's many space operators that are veterans that are no longer in the service, but as you mentioned, have lost a little bit of their identity. And what this legislation does is bring them back home, as a veteran told me recently, and provide them to continue to have that heritage and that identity that I think they've been a part of all those years before we became Space Force. So for me, it's Bacon and I are good friends. When he called and said, you need to get on this legislation, it's a good thing, brought me up to speed, I couldn't say no. It makes total sense.
So basically, the Space Force gets to adopt all these Air Force space operators. That's a good thing.
That's right. Well, it allows me, as you said, Representative, it allows me to basically go home to space, which is phenomenal. So I really do appreciate it. Sir, you mentioned the criticality of the service. So let's go ahead and back it up just a little bit to talk about how important it is to have a separate service focused on ensuring freedom of action in the space domain.
Well, I probably have a bit of a prejudice up front not to add services, because that means more 4 stars, 3 stars, more top heavy. So you'd have to convince me it's the right thing to do. But in this case, I did 30 years in the Air Force, and I felt like the space operators needed to know that there was a space guy running their service that knew all about the space mission, knew about the space servicemen and women. And frankly, after 30 years in the Air Force, we only had fighter pilots, maybe one cargo pilot, but basically we had fighter pilots running the Air Force. And I just thought culture-wise, our space operators need to know that they are run by space experts and not by fighter pilot experts. And so that's what it was, more the culture. And I think you could make a case too on the acquisition. We had so much duplicatory acquisition efforts with all the services when it came to space. This was a chance to streamline that.
Mm-hmm. And Representative Carbajal, from your perspective, how critical it is, and really what we're showing today is the importance of bipartisan support in legislation and in important, events that are happening here in the DoD and obviously in DC.
Well, obviously, Representative Bacon and I share the perspective that space has become essential in our world today, not only for the warfighter and our department and various services, in us to be able to maintain that superiority in the world when it comes to our ability to detect and provide kinetic and other opportunities to our warfighters. But also in the sense that there's already an infrastructure of space operators that really stand us up. And it's really important to make sure that we are recognizing our guardians, in this case, legacy members, but also to provide the resources to continue to expand and really develop Space Force in a way that continues to be in the avant-garde of this domain. You know, when you consider not only our weapons, but our necessities to the department and the services, there's nothing in the civilian world that doesn't rely on space. From our phones to daily operations, GPS, it's essential that we continue to expand our capabilities in space.
It's interesting you bring up that point, Representative, because you're absolutely correct. Folks don't realize it, but they touch space about 50 times per day. And they don't even know it. And yet, if you ask the average person walking around the streets today about whether or not they understand what the Space Force is, I think the feedback you'll get is about 8 to 11% of the U.S. even knows the Space Force exists. So
take banking, for example. Your ATMs, everything you do,
right.
every day with your financial institutions, that's part of space.
That's exactly right. And gentlemen, you both represent two different services, the Marine Corps and the Air Force, respectively. How different is it today, and how the Space Force stood up, and the importance of culture reflective and representative, or compared to the way you understood the culture for your respective services? So, sir, we'll start with you in the Air Force.
Well, it's one of the motivators of having a Space Force to me. I felt like we had more of a fighter pilot culture in the Air Force. You know, it's the way it's been since, well, it was really bomber culture in World War II in Korea up until about Vietnam, then switched over more of a fighter culture. Our space folks needed to have their own culture and know that they had a leadership team that was guided by what's needed by space. And as Salute says, you know, space is the ultimate high ground.
It is.
And you gotta control that, just like you control air and sea and ground. And space will be the first hours of combat in any major war. Our adversary is going to target our satellites and vice versa. So we need to have warriors that's the primary focus.
Yes, sir, absolutely. Representative Carbajal, from your perspective and culture and what you learned in the Marine Corps and how the Space Force gets to learn about culture independent of other service cultures.
Well, what we've come to learn is that every service, including the Marine Corps, is dependent on all our space capabilities. And everything we do is dependent on being able to have the type of tools that will make us more effective. So certainly having mastered all our needs in the space domain is essential and important.
You know, the Marine culture, they're trying to become more and more like the Air Force, but the space needed to have their own thing.
We're still trying to figure out how to do a PFT from a chair like the Air Force that used to do.
Physical fitness
We still
test.
haven't mastered that.
It's good that you, obviously the service cultures are always going to rib each other, which is perfect.
My wife served with the Marines a lot in the Middle East. Fantastic. And I really like how they discuss a plan and they know how to delegate. People know they're part of their mission. They know how to innovate. And I think they do it really well, better than many of the other services. I'll just put it that way.
Absolutely. And we know this administration's moved in. We've got the new SecDef, and there's some discussion going on about ensuring the force is right-sized across the DoD. Can you just share your perspective on, again, you're talking about the criticality of space, and how do we ensure the Space Force has the resources it needs to do its job, its critical mission set? So I'll just get your perspectives.
Well, one of the things that's a concern, and I buy into it to a degree, is that we're too top-heavy. I don't mind a review of the general officers, but we got to be careful where we cut. There's some areas where we are undersized. I'll just give you one example in the cyber force. The Chinese, and it's a classified number, but I'll just say they have many, many, many times the effort in cyber that we have, manpower-wise.
Right.
Do we want to cut there? I don't.
Right.
So I think we shouldn't just do this across the board cuts. It should be thought through in each area, and I think I enjoy knowing the service chiefs for space and their MAGCOM level leadership, and it's important to get their feedback on are they right. And I think they want to add actually more enlisted force to their. Is what I'm hearing. So that I think they're probably undersized at the moment, and it could grow. And I think if we do Golden Dome, a huge element of that is space, and so I foresee the space side of this getting bigger, not smaller.
I agree. I couldn't agree more. Obviously, Representative. Sir, from your perspective.
Well, from my perspective, I think we need to always continue to calibrate to see how we could be more effective, to learn where we have initially gone towards that may not be the new direction when you consider the new capabilities of our adversaries. And we're learning a lot from the war in Ukraine, for example. But we also need to make sure we're taking care of our bread and butter and most treasured resource, and that's our men and women who serve, to make sure they're getting the compensation they need, the support, the equipment, so that they could be effective, and that they and their families who make such a huge sacrifice are able to get along and have the resources they need in their livelihoods. And Don and I and others have been working on that over the years, and I appreciate Don and all the wisdom he brings as a one-star general in the Air Force, or formerly in the Air Force, when we do travel to various Air Force facilities. He brings a lot to the table, and I learn a lot from him. I like to think he also learns a little bit from me, but it's great.
I've learned the best kind of California wine.
That's right. We've been to each other's districts. I've been to Omaha. He's been in my district. He tasted some wine in my district. I ate some of his good prime rib beef in his district. So Don and I have, ever since we came to Congress, have developed a good relationship, a good bipartisan relationship. We don't agree on everything, but we find areas where we do agree. And again, just really appreciate the friendship that we've developed.
He had a great time. We went together to a Taiwanese Air Force base, and I think me and the other commander, we had a bromance or something going on. We connected real well, and he was like,
I can't say on camera what I said to him, but it was a love fest.
Air Force, man, we just hang out together.
Sir, understand and really the Legacy Guardian Act is a big victory for the Space Force Caucus, which you're both members of the Space Force Caucus. Really appreciate your support there. What other initiatives can we start thinking about in terms of recognizing Space Force members for their achievements? So is there opportunities in the future to examine what other events the Space Force Caucus can be thinking about?
Well, I always like the advice from the space leadership. It's interesting. We do missions in Iraq, Afghanistan in years past. We're doing stuff right now in Yemen. We don't realize there's a lot of people in the United States behind space consoles,
right,
or looking at the intelligence from our space and doing weather stuff for Yemen for our B-2 bombers, whatever it may be. So there's space people behind all of this.
Right.
They may not get the same recognition as somebody's flying missions over Yemen, and I think I could make a case there could be a difference there, but there should be recognition still that without space, this wouldn't be happening.
Right. Understand completely. Couldn't agree more. Sir, from your perspective.
Well, I think to be able to continue our momentum, we need to make sure that our infrastructure in all the ranges, supporting all our space operations, but in particular, since Vandenberg Space Force Base is the Western Range, we need to continue to invest in the infrastructure. And Representative Bacon has a piece of legislation called the Secure Leadership in Space Act, which would, for example, like we treat airports and seaports, where we give them the ability to have access to tax-exempt bonds, is what we're trying to do also for spaceports. And those types of actions, I think, will lend themselves to continue to build the infrastructure that we need to be effective for our space operators and all the technology and launching capabilities that we want.
If I may also add, Salute and I and others, very bipartisan, worked on quality of life measures last Congress, got 29 of them passed, pay raises, lodging, dormitories, healthcare. It was very bipartisan. It was team effort by all of us. But I think the thing that our space forces can know for this coming Congress, for those who live off base right now, the military takes 5% of their pay or 5% of their housing allowance. We want to restore that. That's their money to pay the bills. And that was, we had 29 recommendations last time. We wanted that to be 30, but we couldn't convince the Senate.
Right.
So we're going to try it again this year. But we asked, okay, people are starting putting food on the table. Yeah, we're taking 5% of their housing allowance. Doesn't make sense. So we got to fix that.
Right. Couldn't agree more. In the child care always is an issue, I think, for DoD members. And
That's one of the recommendations.
Yeah.
Perfect. And so this.
So I think we're 82% capacity with our child care centers. Got to get it to 100%.
Yes, sir. 100%. No, I couldn't thank you both enough for all the work that you're doing today and continue to do for the Space Force and
Thank you.
supporting. And on behalf of the entire Space Force Association, I have a small token of appreciation.
You get a free trip
So if
around the
no, we're not going to get you into space yet. I think there's probably laws against that, but maybe we can change those and we'll get you into space. But Representative Carbajal, I'd like to present that to you, and Representative Bacon. Thank you
Okay.
so much for everything you do and continue to do.
There we go.
And for folks who want to learn more about the Legacy Guardian Act, please go to ussfa.org, where you can find out how to apply and be recognized as a Legacy Guardian for those who were in the Air Force as space operators. Gentlemen, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to talk with your SFA, and I look forward to speaking with you again in the near future.
SFA does a great job advocating. We like what you're doing.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate
Thank you,
that.
Bill.
We couldn't do it without you guys, so
Thank you.
really appreciate your partnership.
Thank you for your leadership.
Yes, sir.